Good morning. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the L-1 countdown status briefing for Space Shuttle Discovery's STS-133 mission to the International Space Station. Joining me today is Steve Payne, NASA Test Director.
Good morning.
Scott Higginbotham, STS-133 Payload Manager.
Good morning.
And Kathy Winters, Shuttle Weather Officer.
Good morning.
We'll hear from our panelists and then we'll take questions. Steve.
Thank you. You know, next to the launch itself, this is the part I like best. We're in launch countdown within a day of launch. There's a lot of excitement in the air. Everyone's putting on their game face and getting ready for the launch tomorrow. The launch team's been preparing Discovery for her 39th and final flight. That's going to be putting a permanent multipurpose module and the Express Logistics carrier up at the International Space Station. After addressing a couple of issues last night and this morning, our countdown work is currently on schedule, or back on schedule. We had a good reactant load and offload last night. That's enough hold time to take us through the end of our window without having to top off, which is a good thing. Last night we had a couple of issues. We had to go repair a faulty regulator on our launch pad nitrogen purge system. It has a primary and a secondary leg to it. They're redundant systems. The primary side had a bad regulator. So we finished our load, our reactant load, as we intended to, and in the time after that we went and repaired our primary side. And it's back up and supporting. It's in launch configuration now. It's good to go. We also had a little excitement early this morning when we were doing our engine checkouts. We brought up our engine controllers. When we got to our engine 3 backup engine controller, it didn't come up as we had expected. Apparently there was something wrong with one of the 3 phases that provide power to it. After doing some troubleshooting, we narrowed it down to either the circuit breaker or switch that provides it power. We did some troubleshooting. We cycled the breaker and we cycled the switch. We kind of narrowed it down to transient contamination. Once in a while you get that when you push a switch and it doesn't go. After cycling the switch and the breaker a few times, it cleared up. The controllers powered up normally. We did the checkout and they are now back up and supporting. We just recently completed the engine checkout, so they're back up and running, and they should be that way all the way through T0. They're still talking about final disposition, so the paperwork isn't closed, but I think we're going to be okay on that one as well. Currently, the countdown clock is holding at T-minus 11 hours. We're working preps for the checkout for the orbital ground communications network, and that should start this afternoon at 1:30. We're doing our final flight crew equipment stow this afternoon at 3, and that's where they put in the late experiments and food and other things that are perishable and last minute. We'll be performing a number of final inspections of the tank, the boosters and thrusters, and removing access platforms of various kinds in preparation for rotating the rotating service structure this evening. At 7 p.m. tonight, we're going to be taking the rotating service structure back, and we'll begin final crew module configuration for load. At 11:30 tonight, we'll pick up the clock again and resume its count at T-minus 11 hours. And then we'll begin final loading preparations and begin clearing the pad at about 1:30 in the morning tomorrow. At that time, we'll begin purging the mid-body and aft compartment and forward and aft reaction control systems with nitrogen and work final preparations for tanking. Our earliest tanking time is scheduled for 6:27 in the morning tomorrow. Should take us about 3 hours to get the tank filled. Our flight crew is scheduled to arrive just before 1 p.m. on Wednesday. Launch window remains the same. It's a 10-minute window for station flights. We have opportunities for a Flight Day 3 and Flight Day 4 rendezvous, which adds about another 3 minutes to that. Typically, we pick the middle of the window, so we'll go about 5 minutes into it. We're expecting somewhere around 3:47 for window open and about 5 minutes later for middle of the window. Let's see. We have through the 7th of November to get off the ground. That gives us plenty of opportunities to have our 4 attempts in 5 days scenario, which is our standard. Plenty of hold time, so it's not a concern there. It's an 11-day mission with 1 contingency day for mission extension should we need it, and 2 weather contingency days in case we need those as well. Our end of mission landing is planned for a Sunday, November 14th at 9:59 Eastern Time. Right now, it's I'm sure you've heard a great deal about Discovery and her history and her long and distinguished career, but I'd also like to comment on the remarkable team that gets her ready to fly. They put their heart and soul into this one, and they know it's their last flight, and they put everything they can to make it as good as every other flight we've had in the past. She's now poised to take to the skies tomorrow, and when she goes, she's going to take a little bit of every one of us with her, and we're ready.
Thank you, Steve. Scott.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start this morning with a little video compilation of the processing campaign for both the Permanent Multipurpose Module and Express Logistics Carrier 4. The work for those two elements took place over the span of about 13 months, but we're going to compress it down into about 4.5 minutes, so I'm going to try to talk fast. And it does bounce around from element to element, so along the way I'll try to keep it straight for you. This is the arrival of ELC-4. It came in via Air Force C-5 back on August 15th of last year. Flew down from the Goddard Space Flight Center, where the fine people there under Kevin Carmack put this and the other ELCs together for us to go fly. This is the module FM-1 Leonardo that returned on the STS-131 mission, and we got it back into our work stand on the 26th of April of this year and began the process to turn it into a PMM. This is some views of the deintegration of the cargo that took place for a couple of weeks before we actually started the modifications of the element to convert it. This is a view of our common berthing mechanism checkout equipment that we lift up to simulate the station side of the docking interface, and this took place back in mid-May of this year, and we do that to make sure that all those mechanisms are going to work right and seal appropriately once we do dock the element to the station. The work to modify the element primarily took place in May and June and July. This is a lift of ELC-4 over to the rotation stand, one of many times that we flipped it 180 degrees so that we could work on the top side or the bottom side. We started installing racks after the mods were complete into the PMM. The first rack went in on the 7th of July, and the last rack went in on the 22nd of July. We have 14 racks flying up with us inside the vehicle. Our Thales Alenia Space friends working for Roberto Barreto and that great team, they did a lot of the mods on the vehicle, and there they were installing some of the Nextel Kevlar shielding on the vehicle. On the 22nd of July, we installed the thermal radiator, the big honkin' radiator, as some of us call it, on top of VLC-4. It's the one and only ORU that we're flying up on this mission because of mass property limitations. On the bottom side of the deck, there are 5 sites for future payloads and ORUs to be installed, 2 of which are launching on HTV-2 in January. This is a scene of the mate of the deck to its keel. That took place on 4th of August of this year. And that keel comes home. It's the only piece of this complement for the 2 major elements that comes home. Robonaut 2, our favorite robot astronaut, he is flying up with us on this mission. He arrived in early August and spent about 10 days being prepared for installation into its protective enclosure, which is called Sleeper. And ultimately that enclosure was installed in the module as the last major big thing that we put on board. The module was lifted on the 5th of October and weighed one last time before it went into the transportation canister, where it joined up with ELC-4 that was installed back in late September. It was done a little bit earlier. And then once both elements were in the canister, the doors were closed up, and we left the SSPF and went down to our canister rotation facility, where the canister is picked up on end and set back down onto the transporter for the ride to the pad. The canister rolled out to Pad A on the 7th of October of this year, my 21st wedding anniversary. My wife's here in the audience. And rolled out to the pad, arriving in the early morning hours, where it was then hoisted up into the rotating service structure, and then the payload elements were transferred into the payload ground handling mechanism, which is in the payload changeout room that's part of that rotating service structure. That whole rotating service structure then comes back around the orbiter. We open up the doors and we insert the payload elements into the orbiter, make all the necessary mechanical and electrical connections, test those interfaces, and then do our final closeouts. And then on the 16th of October, it all came to a conclusion when we closed the payload bay doors for flight. It was a very bittersweet moment for me and my team. I wouldn't have missed it, though, for the world. It was neat to kiss Leonardo goodbye. And that brings us basically up to where we stand today. The 2 primary elements in the payload bay are ready to go fly, and they are quite content to set as long as is necessary to get Discovery on orbit where it belongs. We have no scrub turnaround considerations for either of the 2 primary elements. For the mid-deck complement, we have quite a few items that we're flying up in the mid-deck research-wise. And the major push to get all those installed in the vehicle will happen today, starting at noon and running till about 7 p.m. tonight. We have 9 different things that we're installing into the vehicle. As far as scrub turnarounds is concerned for the experiments, they run the full spectrum. We have one item that has to be swapped out after every launch attempt, and when we have another item that's good for 30 days and everything in between. So our team has a lot of different plans in place, and we're prepared for whatever the weather or the vehicle throws at us. We'll be prepared to go get the samples freshened and ready to go fly to maximize our science return. So at this point, we're about ready to go put the ULF-5 complement into space and add this amazing pressurized vehicle to the station. It's been part of our family here for a long time. Leonardo's been here for over 10 years, and in some respects, we're sad to see him go because, again, he's an old friend of ours. But spacecraft belong in space, not on the ground, and this is a fitting place for him to end his career. Over the 7 flights that Leonardo has flown so far, it has been in space for about 91 days. It's made 1,500 orbits of the Earth and has traveled about 40 million miles. But as far as used spacecraft go, it's a cream puff. It's still got a lot of good miles left in it, and in fact, if we leave it up there for the full 10 years planned, we're going to put another 1.5 billion miles on that spacecraft. So our team's excited. We're looking forward to the launch and seeing our fine hardware added to the station, and then we can move on to the next chapter in our lives. So that's all I have for you today. Kendria?
Thank you, Scott. Kathy?
Well, good morning. Well, the weather this morning is a little bit cloudy out there here at KSC. We also had some isolated showers in the area this morning. This is all a result of an upper-level low that's dipping down into Texas and drawing a lot of moisture back up into our area. And we kind of expected to see some isolated showers start to occur, and that did start happening today. That is our concern again for tomorrow, is that we could have some showers in the area and also a low cloud ceiling. But a lot of that moisture is going to pull to the north. We still have a very moist atmosphere, though. And so with that, we do expect that it's possible during the countdown tomorrow that we may have to go red for a low cloud ceiling or an isolated shower, or maybe observe no-go for a little while in the early portion of the afternoon, late portion of the morning, early afternoon, as the showers push inland with the sea breeze. But then we expect that conditions will improve as we get closer to launch time. We had something similar like that happen yesterday with our low cloud ceiling in the area as we got into the afternoon hours. The sea breeze pushed in, and we get some sinking air behind that sea breeze, and it helps us out here along the coast. And so tomorrow we'll see something similar like that happen. And so with that, we are optimistic on the forecast, even though we know that it's possible we could go red during the countdown. Right now we are still forecasting a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. Now, if we get into a delay, though, you'll see the forecast. It looks a lot worse as if that entire frontal system is going to be coming across our area. What's happening is an upper-level trough is dipping down from the north into the eastern U.S. That's going to pick up that cutoff low that's going to be sort of drifting in the western Gulf of Mexico, and all that is going to march over Florida. So we'll finally get some much-needed rain on Thursday, but it will deteriorate our launch forecast, and with that we have a 70% chance on Thursday of KSC weather prohibiting launch. Let me go ahead and show you all this on the satellite picture. When you look at the satellite picture, you can see that upper level low is dipping down into Texas. The weather at the surface is all on the east side of that low. And so with that, you can see our friends in Houston did wake up to some thunderstorm activity this morning. And all of that is going to be lingering out in that area for the next 24 hours as that low cuts off and the upper levels out in that area and drifts into the western Gulf of Mexico. With that, though, we will be expecting moisture to pull up into our area. Also to note is Tropical Storm Tomas that's down in the Caribbean about 250 miles south of the island of Hispaniola. That's continuing to be forecast to march towards the west and then make a turn northeast. And unfortunately, it's probably going to give Haiti some trouble here as we get it to the end of the week. Let me show you a closer picture of our satellite here in the local area, a good visible satellite picture. You can see a lot of clouds in the area here in Florida right now. Basically, an old frontal boundary is migrating back north through the area today with bringing all that moisture, and we'll get on the moist side of this boundary after it moves to the north. But we do expect the conditions to look a little bit better tomorrow than what this looks like right now. And then, of course, through the mid-morning, then we'd expect to see some clouds kind of accumulate as the sea breeze first forms. And then as that all migrates inland, we expect the coast to start improving as we get in the afternoon towards launch time. So let's go ahead and before we go on to our launch forecast information, let me show you the Hurricane Center's forecast for Tomas. You can see that right turn that is expected at the end of the week. And now the models differ a little bit on the last 4 to 5 days for Tomas, but still not a threat to Florida. Mainly the threat is to Haiti if the storm starts lingering in that area. Some of the models pull it out to the northeast, so way into the Atlantic, and then there's a couple of them that are starting to linger it in the area of Haiti, which would be unfortunate for them because of the amount of rainfall that they could experience there in the entire island of Hispaniola. So that'll be a concern for them. But for us, this is not a threat, and it's still not a threat also for the SRB recovery area. So let's go ahead and move to our tanking forecast for tomorrow. Weather does look like we'll probably see some more of those isolated showers in the area for tanking, but that's not a constraint for tanking. And so overall weather looks very good. Will be pretty humid tomorrow, and the temperature will be around 74 degrees. The probability of violating tanking constraints, I did go with a 10% chance there. The atmosphere is just starting to trend more unstable, but it's not likely we'd see any lightning in the morning. But I did just drop increase that number from 5 to 10% due to just that unstable atmosphere that's starting to occur. But we expect that to really come more into the following 24 hours. Let's go ahead and go to our launch forecast. You can see there's a chance for some isolated showers still. I expect that they'd mostly be off to the west and inland. Question mark will be if those are going to be within 20 nautical miles of the shuttle landing facility. If so, then that would be an RTLS violation for the shuttle landing facility. Also, we're just slightly concerned that cloud deck at 3,000 feet. We know we'll probably see a ceiling in the early portion of the afternoon. As we get closer to launch time, that should improve and scatter out. But for those concerns, we do have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. For SRB recovery, the weather is not bad at all on launch day, just some isolated showers expected in the area. The seas are going to be 5 to 6 feet. However, over the next several days, the trend is going to be that the seas are going to be on the increase. First of all, with that weather system that moves through on Thursday, and then particularly on Friday, the seas will pick up as that strong wind comes in behind the frontal boundary. So the main concern is just that while they're out there recovering, they're going to be dealing with a lot of weather, and then on Friday, the seas will be increasing to 8 to 11 feet. Spaceflight Meteorology Group is forecasting good conditions at our abort landing sites here in the U.S. And for our TAL sites, the weather still looks very good out there at all 3 TAL sites for launch day. If we do happen to delay 24 hours, things change quite a bit here. That front comes in the area that we talked about, that low comes across. We could get up to an inch of rain in the central Florida area here on the East Coast. And so with the potential for showers in the area and even potential for thunderstorms in the area, as well as low cloud ceilings, we do have a 70% chance on this day of KSC weather prohibiting launch. The abort landing sites, though, in the U.S. still do look good at both Edwards and at Northrop Field. And the only concern Spaceflight Meteorology Group has at the TAL sites is for a chance of 4 miles visibility in fog at Zaragoza, but we only need one good TAL site, and Marone and Istris both look good. For the 48-hour delay, we expect that the frontal boundary will move through sometime either Thursday night or Friday morning. It'll pass completely through the area with some lingering cloud cover behind it, but that will also eventually clear. The bigger concern is the winds picking up on this day. From the direction of 340 degrees, the pad wind constraint is 34 knots. But if it happens to be a little bit more northerly, it starts to decrease. And from straight north, it's actually down to 23 knots. So that's our only concern, our main concern on this day. There's just a slight concern also for a low cloud ceiling during this time in case that boundary moves through a little bit slower than the models are forecasting. So overall, we have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. I will note the upper level winds do get very strong on this day. So sometimes when we have strong jet streams come in, that can cause a concern for our folks at Ascent, at JSC, and Marshall that will be working the upper level winds. But right now, this number does not cover that probability. If we do happen to use the abort landing sites at Edwards and Northrop Field, the weather does look good. And for the TAL sites, again, just a concern at Zaragoza for visibility coming down with fog. So overall, tomorrow looks like a good day, especially when you compare it to Thursday. But tomorrow we have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. Andrew?
Thank you, Kathy. We'll now take your questions. When the microphone comes your way, please state your name, affiliation, and to whom you're addressing your question. We can start over here with Bill.
Bill Harwood, CBS. For Steve, on that controller thing, that's just a paperwork constraint now? There are no constraints to pressing with any of the, mech power-ups and stuff that are normally
No,
associated
the
with
rest of the
that?
count is proceeding normally. The engineering is still figuring out how they want to close the paperwork and what, if anything, we need to do further.
But you don't think this one's going to be an issue for us?
I don't expect it
Okay,
will.
thanks.
Okay, in the second row with Todd, please.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today for Scott. Do you happen to have upmass and downmass totals for Leonardo over its 7 missions? And I have a follow.
Not over the 7 missions, although we could go obtain that. I meant to gather that, but I didn't. Sorry. I do know we're taking up about 6,500 pounds up on this flight of cargo. The module weighs 21,817 pounds as launched on this mission. But over its lifetime, this is a fairly light load for an MPLM because of our mass limitations and CG limitations. So, it normally flies with 8,000 pounds of cargo up per flight.
And just to follow, do you know or can you tell us what the final disposition of the other MPLMs will be? What's going to happen with Raffaello and Donatello?
Well, for now, we're going to hold on to them because there is some talk about potentially flying them on unmanned rockets in the future and maybe as another permanent module to add to the station. So they're good vehicles. They've got a lot of lifetime left in them, and so for now, I think the intent is to hold on to them and see if an opportunity arises.
Just to follow that quickly, do you know what unmanned rockets they would be compatible with?
No, I really don't off the top of my head, Todd.
Okay.
Marcia?
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press. First question for Kathy. Just for kicks, what does the Saturday and Sunday weather look like?
Well, we still are a bit breezy, even a little bit more northerly, and so we'll be watching that because from a northerly direction, if the winds are strong, then that would drop that pad wind constraint down to 23 knots. And then if the high continues to move off, then you start running into crosswind issues. So the winds are still going to be probably the biggest concern as we get into Saturday and Sunday, eventually tapering off, though, and improving weather conditions probably by maybe Sunday afternoon and into Monday. So it'll be trending down during that time.
For Scott, you said there are load limitations with only the radiator on that cargo carrier. Could you explain that a little more, why more equipment couldn't have been loaded on that?
Okay. Well, there's 2 things we have to deal with on every flight. The vehicle itself, based on its performance, flying to the inclination orbit that we're flying to and the altitude we're flying to, has a limit to how much mass it can carry up. And then furthermore, we have to keep the vehicle within certain center of gravity limits so that it can safely fly back in the event of an emergency or for a nominal landing. And so when you look at both of those things, it limits you as to what you can fly. And there's a team in Houston that does very, very thorough analysis looking at mission complements and coming up with the best way to get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, and how we lay out that cargo. And several months ago, actually it would have been well over a year ago, there was an assessment done to look at some different configurations for these last few flights, and the best scenario they could come up with over those few flights was to fly this module and this deck and this configuration loaded out as they are, and even though they're not completely full, either one, it's the best that we could do under the circumstances and stay within the orbiter's performance limits.
Ken, here down at the end.
Hi, Ken Kramer for Spaceflight Magazine for Scott. Can you please describe a little more detail the 9 items you'll be putting on today?
Well, let's see. We have a Glacier, which is a fridge freezer that we're going to install, and in that fridge freezer we're going to be installing a JAXA experiment called C-SPINS, and that is an acronym that's about 1.5 feet long, so I don't think I can help you with that. We have 2 animal enclosure modules for a mouse immunology experiment that are going on board. Those are both powered. The Glacier is also powered. We have a commercial generic bioprocessing apparatus, which we've flown many times. This time it's carrying the National Lab Pathfinder Vaccine 11 experiment. And so those comprise our 4 powered experiments. We have a colored fungi in space experiment that's from Europe. We have a National Lab Pathfinder Cell 6 experiment. We have the JAXA experiment that I mentioned earlier. We have LMM Bio, which is it's a biological experiment that's going to go up and use the microscope that's in one of our microgravity research racks on orbit to prove that microscope can be used to look at biological samples. And then we have a materials processing experiment called BCAT 6 that's going up that we're installing today. think that's all of them.
And on the end here, please.
Justin Mullins from New Scientist. At first, Steve, what happens to Discovery after the mission has ended? Is it final resting place been determined?
Not officially. There are a number of organizations bidding for the orbiters, and that there's a panel that's going to determine where they all end up at some point. They're all going to museums where the public can enjoy them as much as we have. But the official who's getting which one is not yet been put out, so I don't know the answer to you.
When will the decision be made?
I'm not sure. We might have to get back to you with an answer on that one.
Okay.
Third row, please.
Question for Steve. Mark Ratterman with Talking Space. On the number 3 engine, the backup controller that you mentioned, the problem powering it up overnight, are those switches, I may have missed this, is this orbital or ground support equipment?
These are orbiter switches. There is a circuit breaker on the left side panel L4, and there is a switch on the right side panel where the pilot sits, R2, and those are the ones we cycled.
When did they come into play during the countdown, or is that a...
At this point, they're going to stay where they are.
Okay.
Okay, are there any more questions? That will conclude today's STS-133 L-1 countdown status briefing. As Steve mentioned, the rotating service structure will move away from Space Shuttle Discovery in preparation for its launch tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be shown on NASA television. Commentary coverage for the launch tomorrow will begin with tanking at 6:25 a.m. Eastern Time live on NASA TV. For more information on the STS-133 mission and its crew, visit www.nasa.gov/shuttle. Thank you.